Growing up, I didn't know my biological father. My earliest memories were of a man named Marcus. A tall, broad-shouldered man with skin like polished mahogany and a voice so deep it could calm storms. He wasn't my blood father, but in every way that counted, Marcus was Dad. He met my mother when I was just 2 years old. She was struggling then, barely scraping by, working nights, and trying to finish school. When Marcus came into our lives, everything changed. He wasn't flashy or loud. He just showed up. Every day. Consistently. Without complaint. That quiet reliability, I later learned, was a kind of love too few people talk about. Marcus never made a big deal about money, but it was obvious he was doing well. He owned a small construction company. Nothing massive, but enough to keep us comfortable. He was up before the sun and didn't come home until it dipped again behind the trees. Even so, he never missed a parent-teacher meeting or a school play. He taught me how to ride a bike, how to shake hands with confidence, how to shave when the time came. Despite the world sometimes treating him with suspicion because of his skin color, he held his head high. He taught me to do the same. People might judge me before I speak, he once said, but I make sure they respect me before I leave. By the time I hit my 20s, Marcus had put both me and my younger sister through college. He'd paid for the down payment on our first cars. He never once brought up how much he'd spent, not when my mother had medical issues, not when my sister moved back home with a newborn, not even when I flamed out at my first 2 jobs and needed help covering rent. To us, Marcus was the spine of the family. The man who held it all together, who bore the weight when everyone else was ready to collapse. And yet, despite all this, I never once thought to ask, what did he need? It wasn't until years later, when my mother passed away, that everything began to unravel. The day of the will reading, I was more focused on grief than anything else. My mother's passing had hit us hard. She and Marcus had been together for almost 3 decades. She died in her sleep, peaceful, they said. Marcus had been the one to find her. He hadn't cried in front of us, but I noticed how his hands trembled at the funeral. The man who'd always seemed immovable was suddenly brittle. We gathered in the lawyer's office, me, my sister, a couple of distant cousins, and Marcus. The air felt dense. Grief has a way of making time feel slower, heavier. Marcus sat in the corner, quiet, eyes on the floor. He wore his best suit, the same one from the wedding anniversary party we threw 2 years prior. He hadn't said much since the funeral, except to ask if we were okay. The lawyer cleared his throat, opened the manila envelope, and began reading the will aloud. What followed next would fracture our family. Because somehow, in a will written barely 8 months before her death, Marcus was not mentioned. Not once. No property. No savings. No sentimental items. Nothing. Just like that, the man who had carried us, who paid for everything, loved us fiercely, raised us as his own, was left out. But the mystery wasn't just about why he was excluded. It was about how this could have happened. And whether someone had made sure it did. The room fell quiet after the lawyer finished reading. It was the kind of silence that makes your ears ring. No one moved. No one even blinked. I glanced over at Marcus. His face didn't change. Not even a twitch. But that stillness, that rigid, too perfect stillness, felt wrong. It was the kind of quiet people where when they've been hurt so deeply they don't even know how to process it yet. My sister reached out to touch his arm, but he pulled away, gently, politely, but enough to draw a line. The lawyer looked confused, almost embarrassed. There might be another document, he said, rifling through his folder as if some page had gotten lost in transit. Are you certain there wasn't a codicil or? He trailed off, sensing the tension climbing higher by the second. I finally found my voice. There's got to be a mistake. She wouldn't do that. She wouldn't leave him out. The lawyer nodded sympathetically, but the document in his hand said otherwise. Marcus stood. It's fine, he said, voice steady, low, resigned. It's her decision. I respect it. That was Marcus for you, always the bigger person. But it wasn't fine. Not to me. Not after everything. And deep down, I don't think it was fine to him either. He walked out without another word, leaving a vacuum of confusion and guilt behind him. In the days that followed, the family splintered. My sister thought maybe Mom had made a new will while under medication and forgotten to mention Marcus. An aunt whispered something about legal technicalities. But there was something else under the surface, something no one wanted to admit aloud: suspicion. You could feel it at the repast, in the long pauses between conversations, in the glances people exchanged when they thought no one was watching. Someone had tampered with that will. We just didn't know who, or why. The house, which Marcus had paid off in full a decade ago, now legally belonged to me and my sister. The cars, the jewelry, the investment accounts, all divided neatly between us. And Marcus, the man who made all of it possible, who had stood by my mother's side longer than most marriages last, he got nothing. A week later, I stopped by the house to check in on him. He was already packing, quietly folding his clothes into old suitcases, boxing up tools from the garage, placing pictures face down in cardboard bins. It felt like a funeral all over again. "You're not even going to fight it?" I asked. He shook his head. "No point. What would I fight for? A house I bought but never owned. Money I earned but didn't control. Memories that they don't want to remember." I didn't know what to say. I felt small, complicit, even though I'd done nothing. Then he said something that changed everything. Someone made sure I'd be erased. And they did it while smiling in my face. There it was. The crack in his armor. The hurt he'd buried deep enough that not even death had loosened it, until now. I knew my mother had loved Marcus. That wasn't the question. The real question was, who stood to benefit from making him disappear? Who had the access, the motive, the quiet power to rewrite history in her final moments? As Marcus loaded the last box into his truck, he turned back to me. "I gave everything I had to this family. All I wanted in return was a little dignity. I didn't even get that." Then he drove off. But I wasn't about to let it end like that. Someone had buried the truth. I intended to dig it up. It started with a hunch. And guilt. After Marcus drove off, I couldn't sleep. Every creak in my apartment sounded like judgment. Every old photograph of Mom and Marcus smiling together felt like a lie someone else had tried to erase. I kept thinking about what he said, how someone had made sure he was erased. And I couldn't shake the sense that it hadn't been an accident. The next morning, I went back to my mom's lawyer. Mr. Harland was old school, grey suit, oak desk, and a wall of dusty law books he probably hadn't touched in a decade. When I asked him if he was sure the will was real, he gave me a look. Not annoyed. Nervous. "She sent this version to us 8 months ago. We updated her file accordingly," he said, steepling his fingers. "But, now that you mention it, she seemed hesitant during the meeting. Asked a lot of questions about privacy. Whether anyone else could view her drafts. That caught my attention. Did anyone else have access to her drafts?" I asked. Harland paused. "Well, her emails weren't encrypted. And she did ask us to send a copy to your sister. Said she wanted her to take a look and make sure it all made sense. Thought she meant emotionally, not legally." That sent a chill down my spine. I left his office with a copy of the final will and a pit forming in my stomach. I knew my sister loved Marcus. Or, at least, I thought she had. But over the past year, things had changed. Her financial troubles were piling up. Her ex had stopped paying child support. She was back under Mom and Marcus's roof, watching her independence slip away piece by piece. Had desperation turned into betrayal? I drove straight to her place. She was surprised to see me. Her toddler was napping in the next room, the TV was on low, and she was in sweats, folding laundry. "I need to ask you something," I said. She blinked. "Okay. Did you help Mom rewrite the will?" She stiffened. Just a flicker. But enough. Yeah. She asked me to look it over. She was worried about Marcus. Thought he might outlive her and marry someone else, and she didn't want the house going to some other woman. That's all. That's all. I echoed. You didn't suggest taking him out entirely. She hesitated. Then looked down at the pile of laundry. She said she'd already taken care of him financially, she muttered. That he had his business, his savings. She wanted to make sure we were secure. We're her kids. Blood. That word hit me wrong. Blood. As if Marcus's sacrifices didn't count because he hadn't shared our DNA. She loved him, I said. You know that. My sister didn't answer. That night, I couldn't let it go. I logged into Mom's old laptop. Thankfully, I still had the password. I started going through her emails, drafts, even the trash folder. That's when I found it. A draft of the will from a year ago. In it, Marcus was listed first. The house was to go to him. The life insurance policy too. And there was a letter attached, a note she'd typed but never printed. To Marcus, my rock. If you're reading this, I'm gone. I want you to know you were everything to me. You made me feel safe when I was at my most fragile. You gave my children a father when they had none. I wish I had more time to say this in person. I stared at the screen, pulse thudding in my ears. That version had never been submitted. And the only people who knew how to access her files were family. Someone had overwritten her final wishes. Replaced them. Discarded her goodbye. Marcus hadn't been forgotten. He had been removed. The discovery felt like betrayal twice over, first against Marcus and then against my mother. That letter, even in digital ink, was so full of warmth and truth. It read like a love she had never been allowed to show fully in public, perhaps because of quiet judgment in the family, or maybe even within herself. Yet she had written it. Meant it. And someone had taken it away. I printed everything, her original will draft, the letter to Marcus, and the metadata showing the document's creation date. The revision, the deletion. It was all time-stamped. My next stop was obvious. I waited until my sister was out. I knew her apartment well enough to let myself in. Her laptop was on the kitchen counter, open and glowing. She trusted me. Or used to. I clicked through her files carefully. She wasn't tech-savvy. There were receipts, baby photos, resumes, and emails. One thread, between her and our mother, stood out. She had convinced Mom to update the will, talking about planning smart, and making sure Marcus didn't control everything. Her language was subtle, manipulative. And beneath it all, a thread of resentment. I kept reading. There were more emails, between her and a cousin of ours, a guy who'd always called Marcus too quiet to trust. My sister had forwarded him the draft for feedback. He wasn't a lawyer. Just someone with a deep grudge and slick words. They'd erased Marcus together. Under the illusion of protecting family assets. I sat down hard in her kitchen chair, suddenly lightheaded. It wasn't just greed. It was fear. Fear that Marcus, a black man who had married into a white family, might actually own the legacy he built. And they couldn't stand it. I left the house with my hands shaking. I didn't confront her. Not yet. This was bigger than family drama. This was character assassination. Legal, silent, and cruel. I drove out to Marcus's place. He'd moved into one of his old job trailers behind his construction yard. The place was clean but cold. Sparse. He answered the door in a hoodie and jeans, a slight limp in his walk I hadn't noticed before. I didn't waste time. I found the original will, I said, handing him the papers. She left everything to you. Someone else changed it. He didn't speak. He just stared at the letter. His hands trembled slightly, just once, before he folded it closed and held it against his chest. She did love me, he said, more to himself than to me. She did, I nodded. This isn't over. He sat down slowly, his silence heavy. Then he looked at me with something like relief in his eyes. Or maybe sorrow. I could fight it, he said. Legally. But I'd be fighting your sister. Your family. You are family, I shot back. He gave a small, sad smile. Not to everyone. That's when I realized, he wasn't angry anymore. Just tired. 30 years of loyalty, love, and labor, all made invisible by a single legal maneuver. But I wasn't done. If you won't fight it, I will, I said. She trusted you. She trusted me too. And this isn't just about money or a house. It's about making sure her voice counts. He looked at me, Quiet again. Then he nodded. Just once. And for the first time since the funeral, I saw something flicker in his eyes. Hope. Taking on the family felt like declaring war. The moment I filed a petition to challenge the will, the calls started. First polite. Then angry. Then silent, passive-aggressive texts about keeping family business private. But I'd already crossed that line. And I wasn't looking back. The legal process was slow. The courts didn't care about feelings. They wanted proof, and I had it: original will drafts, metadata, emails, the letter. Most importantly, Marcus hadn't waived his rights. Technically, as a surviving spouse, he still had a legal claim. My mother had just excluded him, and no one expected him to challenge it. Until now. My sister didn't speak to me directly. Instead, she filed a counter-motion. Claimed Mom had changed her mind. That Marcus had been emotionally distant and didn't need the support. The same man who gave her a roof, helped raise her child, and never asked for thanks, now painted as a burden. The betrayal deepened every time she opened her mouth in court. I didn't recognize her anymore. But something remarkable began to happen. One by one, people started remembering. My uncle, who Marcus had loaned money to. A neighbor who recalled Marcus building my mother a garden when her back went bad. Even our old pastor, he testified that Mom had once confided in him that Marcus was the best man she ever knew. These voices, once silent, rose up. They carried Marcus's story where documents could not. The court listened. They reviewed the digital evidence. The will tampering. The unsubmitted version. They weighed it all, along with character witnesses and a forensic IT specialist who confirmed the email deletions came from my sister's IP address. In the end, the judge didn't void the revised will outright. But she did something that stunned everyone, especially my sister. She ruled that Marcus was entitled to an elective share, and, based on compelling evidence of undue influence and attempted suppression, she expanded that share to include the house, one of the investment accounts, and legal ownership of my mother's letter as proof of intent. My sister stormed out of court. She didn't speak to me at the parking lot. Just got into her car and peeled away. I stood there, in the fading afternoon light, next to Marcus, who looked like a man trying to breathe again after being underwater too long. He didn't say anything. Just nodded, once. But that nod said more than any thank you could. The next week, I helped him move back into the house. Not out of pity. Out of justice. He didn't redecorate or throw out anything. He kept her photos up, her garden alive, her chair untouched. He still treated the place like a shared home, not a victory. People eventually stopped calling him stepfather. They started calling him what he'd always been. Dad. As for my sister, she moved out of town a few months later. We haven't spoken much since. Sometimes, I think about reaching out. But then I remember the silence Marcus lived through. The quiet erasure. And I remind myself that choosing justice sometimes means choosing distance. One evening, Marcus sat on the porch with me, sipping his usual black coffee. Funny thing, he said, about being left out. What's that? I asked. It shows you who never saw you, and who never stopped looking. I nodded. Because in the end, this wasn't just a story about a will, or a house, or even betrayal. It was about memory. About truth. About not letting someone be forgotten just because it's convenient. Marcus was never invisible. He was just waiting for someone to look hard enough to see him.